Welcome to the Nonviolent Jesus podcast. I'm John, Father John Deere, and today I'm speaking with legendary civil rights leader Andrew Young. This is a project of www.beatitudecenter.org, where you can find many other podcasts and regular Zoom programs on the nonviolence of Jesus and practicing nonviolence and working for a more just, more nonviolent world. So we always begin here with a little prayer, so I invite everyone just to take a deep breath and to relax and to recenter yourself, and let's all together enter into the presence of the God of peace who loves you infinitely and everyone everywhere. And let's welcome the risen nonviolent Jesus here with us and ask for the grace to follow him more faithfully and do God's will. Beloved God, thank you for all the blessings of life, love, and peace that you give us. Be with us now as I reflect with Andrew Young on your call to follow the nonviolent Jesus and work for a more nonviolent, more just world. Bless us, inspire us, disarm us, strengthen us, and send us out to do your will, to do our part, to help end violence, poverty, racism, greed, injustice, war, fascism, nuclear weapons, and environmental destruction, that we might be your holy peacemakers and welcome your reign of universal love, nonviolence, and peace on earth. Amen.
We will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
It's a great blessing to welcome civil rights leader Andrew Young here to the Nonviolent Jesus podcast. He was Dr. King's right-hand man, his number one lieutenant, and of course the executive director of SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an ordained UCC minister. He was elected to Congress, then later named ambassador to the UN, and then was elected mayor of Atlanta for 2 terms. It's hard to describe all that Andy has done, but he was recently featured in a 2-hour documentary by Rachel Maddow. He has received 100 honorary degrees from university and colleges and many other awards, and I recommend his autobiography called An Easy Burden. He was born in New Orleans in 1932 and currently lives in Atlanta with his wife Carolyn. He's the father of 3 daughters and 1 son, a grandfather of 9, and a great-grandfather of 1. Andrew Young, welcome to the Nonviolent Jesus podcast.
Now it's a great-grandfather of 2.
Congratulations. So I'm hoping to broadcast this.
Time marches on.
Yeah, I'm hoping this will be broadcast on Dr. King's holiday. So I thought we could talk about your friend and boss, Dr. King. I've been studying him and reading him all my life. He changed my life when I was a boy at his death, and I've been trying to follow his teachings and yours. And primarily that has meant for me, Andy, spending 45 years teaching the nonviolence of Jesus through the Fellowship of Reconciliation and many other groups. So I'd like to ask, as we begin, from your perspective, what did you learn about nonviolence from Dr. King? What does it mean for you?
Well, I learned about nonviolence from Dr. King, but I guess even before I had met Dr. King, I had learned about nonviolence from my Quaker professors in seminary, and people like Bayard Rustin that had been teaching nonviolence all over the world. But that was 1952 when I was in seminary, and I was surrounded by people who were raised in a nonviolent faith. And there were several of my professors who were Quakers for life. And it was very easy on a seminary campus to surround yourself with people who were lovers of peace and lovers of humanity and lovers of Jesus Christ. Um, and it was a good preparation. And I think that the nonviolent Jesus that I learned about from my professors and from Dr. King lived in a world very much like ours. That it was not a peaceful world. It was not a loving world. It was a world where Herod killed all of the babies trying to kill Jesus. It was a horrible place, and it was in the midst of that kind of world that God sent His Son. And here it is, thousands of years later, and we are still talking about His message. And we're still realizing that what was revealed in Jesus of Nazareth and is present very clearly in our New Testament is relevant and powerfully important for us dealing with the day-to-day crises of our lives.
Did you and Dr. King talk about Jesus as being nonviolent? Or was it presumed? Or you wouldn't see? I never heard him use that word to describe Jesus, but I'm sure he did.
No, I tell you, we didn't talk about Jesus so much as we prayed about Jesus, and we prayed to be like Jesus, and it was a very prayerful movement because we didn't know what we were doing. Martin Luther King, I like to remind people that he was a young minister, had just been ordained, and he was not even in the meeting in Montgomery. He was in the back in the mimeograph room, running off the flyers about a bus boycott when the meeting was going on in the front of his church. They came to a kind of stumbling block between trying to decide whose turn it was to be the spokesman for that movement. And there was a disagreement between the Baptists and the Methodists, and the women in the church said, well, why don't we let this young man in the back be the spokesman for our first meeting? And he was not even in the meeting when they chose him. And he had less than an hour to prepare. It was almost 7:00. The mass meeting was at another church in another part of town at 8:00. And he then was told that he was to be the spokesman. So there was no time to prepare. But his wife was pregnant and could not come. And so she asked the director of the choir at their church to record his speech for her.
So that's how that happened.
So we have a good recording.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing about that recording is that when you hear him speak, and remember, he was running the mimeograph machine and was not even in the meeting. But in that speech, when he went to the next church and began to speak, you hear all of the themes and messages that propped up in his Nobel Prize speech and his speech at March on Washington, in Chicago, in Detroit. The nonviolent message was a part of his life. And I don't know that he ever talked specifically about nonviolence as nonviolence a doctrine or theory, but he talked about the need to unite Montgomery that had been fragmented by the fact that they disrespected Rosa Parks and took her off the bus because because she would not get up and give her seat to the white person. She was not hurt, and it was not an emotional meeting, but it started a economic withdrawal campaign, which lasted for 381 days and ended up changing the nation.
Yep.
So that you see Jesus in action, though you might not hear his name. But you also did hear his name in almost every time Martin spoke. He was referring to his relationship to Jesus of Nazareth. It's a spiritual mystery, how the concept of nonviolence moves across the earth from person to person, heart to heart, and breast to breast, as we say. It popped into my head now that a song we used to sing in church, it's not with swords loud clashing, nor roll of stirring drum, but through deeds of love and mercy, the heavenly kingdom comes.
Oh, that's beautiful. Tell me how you met Dr. King and when you started to work with him and your early impressions of him.
Our paths crossed several times. He came to speak in Atlanta, and I was there, but I didn't go up to speak to him. I had heard him speak in St. Louis at a meeting of Christian education directors of churches of different denominations. But again, I spoke to him, but everybody wanted to gather around him, but I didn't. I just spoke and told him what I thought of his speech. And it was almost a year later when I was invited. I was asked to come to Talladega College in Alabama because he had been invited to speak at a Religious Emphasis Week program, and they were afraid that he was not going to be able to come. So they called me and asked me would I come, and in case he didn't show up. And we both showed up. And so instead of a speech or two speeches, we ended up having a dialogue with the professor. Well, he wasn't a professor then, he was a student, and it was led by a fraternity. But we talked for a couple of hours together. I don't remember what we talked about, except that we didn't disagree, and we were finding different ways to say some of the same things. At the end of the meeting, my wife was with me, and we realized that his wife was not there because she was had just delivered a baby, and I was there with my baby, baby girl, both baby girls, and he invited us to stop by his house on the way back. We were driving back to Thomasville, Georgia, and we had to drive through Montgomery, and so we stopped off at his house to have dinner. But we never talked about anything but our daughters. And he was a proud father, and so was I.
And then he invited you a few years later to join the staff of SCLC?
No, we didn't see each other for another 2 years.
Uh-huh.
And I got a call. See, he lived a very difficult life.
Yeah.
And I was aware of it. And I was, by that time, I had moved to New York and was working with the National Council of Churches in youth work. And I got a call from a friend of his because a foundation wanted to give him some money to do a voter registration project. And he had not been settled down enough to have a 501c3 clearance approval. to receive a grant as a nonprofit corporation. He was still operating basically as pastor of no church, because by that time he was leaving Montgomery and going back to pastor with his father. And I got this call, and I ended up going to the United Church of Christ office and asking them if they could find a way to give this money to one of their church organizations. And they ended up approving a grant to Dorchester Center in Georgia. And they approved it and said they would renovate some of the properties that the church had across the South, and that they thought maybe I should leave New York and go back to Georgia and sort of be the administrator for that project. Wow. So I really ended up going back to his office in Atlanta before he got there. Mm-hmm. He had been stabbed and had been given some time to recover, studying in India, and was not there. And I showed up with a grant and a project before he got back. And then when he got back, they arrested him and put him in jail in Reidsville, Georgia, because what they charged him with was driving in Georgia with an expired Georgia license or Alabama license or something. But it was really nothing. It was trivial. And they just wanted an excuse to arrest him.
So let me stop you there, Andy. I wanted to definitely ask you about Reidsville, and I want you to take a little time. And here's why. A couple of years ago, I did a great Zoom with a friend, probably your friend, Cornel West, and I was asking him about Dr. King. And he said to me, this was total news to me, that in the 1970s, Daddy King said to Cornel, "From now on, everything about Martin begins with Reidsville." And then last year I had Jonathan Eag on for a Zoom about his big new biography about Dr. King. And he told me that you called him after the book came out and congratulated on the book and said you missed one thing, Reidsville. In other words, that whole experience of being in the station wagon all night long with the German Shepherd and expecting to be shot and killed.
It wasn't a station wagon, it was a police
van. So, but what happened there that he was bent over and then he was talking about the cross from then on? Why is that? Should that be the beginning of all our understanding of Dr. King?
He was really trying to ease his way out of the movement.
Oh.
He was leaving Montgomery, coming back to Atlanta because he thought Atlanta would be more peaceful.
So he's going to work with his father and everything's going to be easier?
He was going to be the co-pastor with his father. Remember, he had already been jailed. He had already been stabbed. His home had been bombed. And then Reidsville was an attempt to scare the hell out of him, really, because they picked him up on...
Yeah, tell us the details.
They picked him up on the street. He was walking with students who were picketing Riches, but he was just down there as support. He was and encouraging them, and the police from another county came in and picked him up off the street and took him with them, and nobody knew where he was. Well, he spent the night in the DeKalb County Jail, which is about 20 miles from where he was picked up. But then in the middle of the night, they put him in the back of this paddy wagon in chains and with nothing but him and a police dog, a German Shepherd. And there were no expressways then. So riding down Reidsville is about 300 miles from Atlanta, in winding roads through the country. And as he went around those curves and up and down those hills, he was rolling from side to side because he was in chains. And the German Shepherd would growl. And I used to tell him, I said, that German Shepherd saved your life because you spent more time thinking about calming down the German Shepherd, and it didn't leave you time to panic. But I said, God works in mysterious ways. And that, Steve Biko in South Africa
Right.
lost his mind in the back of a paddy wagon like that. Yeah. And came out, fighting the policemen, and they beat him to death. Yeah. There was a long tradition in Georgia of taking people in handcuffs in a paddy wagon, taking them out to a bridge over, in this case, it was the Flint River, which runs across Georgia into the Chattahoochee and down into the Gulf of Mexico. And that was a notorious way of killing people and having their bodies disposed of. And I'm sure that's what they wanted him to think. But he couldn't think about that so much because he kept trying to calm this German Shepherd down. Yeah. Now, the irony of it is, and the beauty of it in some way is that he had a German Shepherd puppy, a dog, as a boy when he was 3 or 4 years old. Huh. And so he grew up with a German Shepherd as his boyhood friend. And so he was not afraid of this dog.
Gosh. So Daddy King told Cornell that he was bent over that whole night in the paddy wagon, and that when they got him out, he couldn't even straighten up his back. And he said to his father, he immediately started talking about the cross and carrying the cross. And then Cornell was saying on our Zoom, in effect, from then on, every day he talked about the cross and that famous saying, unearned suffering love is redemptive, which seems to be in every speech he gave. Is that your impression too? And by the way, tell me about that, because nobody talks about the cross anymore, but he talked about it all the time.
Well, but that was, I think that that was me. I was guilty of that. His daddy was guilty of that. And Cornel West would be guilty of that. But actually, as I remember, he never talked about the details of his death. But he would laugh and talk about death. And it was something that he talked a lot about, but never in sorrow or in fear. It was always in humor. Mm-hmm. And it was so typical of his life that that when he was finally killed and I was there, I had my reflection was back to Elijah going to heaven on a flaming chariot because the bullet hit his spinal cord and severed it. And because bullets go faster than the speed of sound, he probably never heard the bullet, and he probably never felt the pain because his spinal cord was severed. And he was laying there with his pulse still beating. And I looked up over just beyond the Mississippi River in Memphis, and the first thing I thought of was Martin and made it to heaven in a flaming chariot. Yeah. And because that was something we found a way to talk about death in a context of humor and playfulness. It was never serious. It was never sad. It was you know, you're going to die. There ain't no hiding place. Went to the rock. Went to the rock, hide my face, the rock crying out, no hiding place. There's no hiding place down here. If you're man born of trouble is few days and full of trouble. And you almost look to your death as a blessing.
It's so hard to even talk about all that you did in the civil rights movement with you and Martin and all your friends, and we don't have that much time, but the genius of you and the SCLC was, I think, in my opinion, your strategy after Reidsville. You go to Albany, and that didn't provoke a response. So you pick Birmingham, and then you pick Selma, and then you pick Chicago, and then there were other things, the Poor People's Campaign.
Well, we picked Birmingham, first of all.
Yeah, any memories about all of that you'd like to tell me about, or something that's still vivid that would help me understand nonviolence and Jesus?
There had been over 60 bombings of homes in Birmingham in the early 1960s, 1961 to 63. And in 1962, I think it was December the 16th, is the day I remember that Fred Shuttlesworth came to our office in Atlanta and said that his home had been bombed. It was a Monday, and his home had been bombed that Sunday, and right after church. And his house was next to the church, and his house, the gables were down on the ground, and the house caved in as a result of the bomb thrown at the church. And he crawled out, still dressed in his suit and tie, and said that, they can't kill me. They just as well quit trying. But he came to Atlanta the next day, that Monday, and asked Martin, said, we have got to do something not violent, but something more aggressive. We just can't sit back and wait for them to bomb our homes and blow up our churches. We need to find a way to make nonviolence more aggressive. And Martin said, well, that means you'd want a nonviolent movement. And but there was an election coming up at the end of the month in January. And he said, we don't want to do anything in an election time to get people all stirred up. But that'll give us time to prepare. And he turned to me and he said, Andy, do you know any white folks in Birmingham? And I said, I don't know any black folks in Birmingham. I said, I hardly been to Birmingham. And he said, well, you got a month to see if you can find some.
Wow.
And I said, why me? And he said, well, you're comfortable talking to white people. You've been working with white people in New York. And said, you won't get angry and upset. And he said, we need to set up a conversation with the white business community and churches and explain to them how a nonviolent movement works and prepare them for the things that are to come. And he said, he didn't have to say it, but he did, that's the most important part of a nonviolent movement. Now, that's also one of the reasons why our more recent nonviolent movements have not been as successful as they could have been, because we don't take the time before demonstrations to prepare for them. And we don't, it's not a judgment, but we didn't know about a nonviolent movement until George Floyd's death was on television in everybody's home for 9.5 minutes. And there was no time. People just went to the streets and started demonstrating. But we had time, and we took the time in Birmingham. And I set up a meeting with, I went to see the Episcopal bishop. And he agreed to meet with Martin and Ralph and Shuttlesworth. And then he agreed that he would bring a group of the business community and what we used to call the white power structure of the city together to meet with us. So all of this was going on during that January before the movement.
So it's just so amazing all that you did.
That preparation is very important.
Since we don't have too much time, so then in those months leading up to March, you started the campaign marching through downtown Birmingham, and you're calling for an end of segregation. And then the Good Friday.
Well, before we got to that, we had the black community sit down and write a Birmingham manifesto. And they wrote their complaints, the things that they thought were unjust. And we didn't do that. And Birmingham didn't have it didn't have a black college in Birmingham, I don't think. And so there were very few black people with doctorate degrees or no intellectuals hardly in this movement group. It was the doctors' wives and the ministers' wives that brought much of the brain power to it. But it was a profound document that we put in the Birmingham Post-Herald before we started marching. Wow. To explain why we were going to be marching. The ministers then, even though we had talked to them, the white ministers, they wrote an answer, but blaming it all on Martin Luther King coming to stir up trouble, even after we had met with them. And Martin then wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail in jail. And it was written around the margins of the New York Times. And when they ran out of space in the New York Times front section, he started writing on toilet tissue. So you had 3 documents coming out of Birmingham. And actually, that's where one of our lawyers left Birmingham and went to Harvard, and he was the one that wrote the papers about the books about, I forget what they are now, discrimination, the DEI or something like that.
So let me ask you then, so the letter from the Birmingham jail, the greatest documents in American history, and then the marches begin, and then Bevel leads the children out there. I want to ask you about Double D Day, because when I was studying nonviolence, I think it's called Double D Day. So around May 2nd, we're talking 1963. Yeah. Now the children are marching in waves, and the white police can't handle it and pull Connor. And I was taught nonviolence in college at Duke in the 70s, and the teacher's building it all up. And he goes to this moment, what you guys call Double D Day. Tell me about that. When here come thousands of singing kids.
Well, what happened?
But the fire hoses were put down, and
even when Martin was in jail, we started having meetings in the churches after school. This was 62, 63. There wasn't much, people didn't have money. There wasn't much television. People didn't own television sets in large numbers. And so we would put up we would show movies, and we would have high school kids in the churches near the school. And we showed them the movie of the Montgomery Improvement Association, and of the sit-ins in Nashville, and of Gandhi's movement of independence in India with no violence. And so we had 3 movies, and for about 3 weeks, we showed movies to the students near the high schools. And so we trained them intellectually to understand the meaning of nonviolence and to go through what we knew might be violence without fear or without hatred or anger. And it was almost like it became like a game. They were singing, and they were not afraid in the fire hoses, nor of the German shepherds, but it was because they had several weeks of discussion and training and understood that this was not in anger and frustration, that this was the joy of acting as though you were free, even though you knew there would be consequences because others didn't want you to be free.
So they marched to the fire hoses.
Others didn't want you to act free.
Mm-hmm.
You were getting out of your place, and you were no longer the oppressed, downtrodden, sad people. You were singing freedom songs. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. The one that let me see, how does that go? It's one of my favorite freedom songs, and I'm drawing a blank on it now.
Well,
I love everybody. I love everybody in my heart. I feel the love of Jesus. I feel the love of Jesus in my heart. That's why you can't make me doubt him. I know too much about him. I have the love of Jesus in my heart. And so they would be marching, singing these freedom songs. And they sang them every night in church. And they sang them in jail. So nobody was sad. Nobody was depressed. It wasn't a time of despair. In fact, we had more people probably because we had ministers assigned to go to jail with the young people. And many of them had revivals in the prisons and accepted young people as members of the church while they were in jail.
Wow.
Because there was Bible study and hymns and all of this was a part of, and discussions. And all of this was a part of growing up in Birmingham.
So, Andy, here we are today, all these years later, and we're honoring Dr. King and you and everybody in the movement and the power of nonviolence that you showed the world. And we're in this terrible time. And so my general question is, as we honor Dr. King and learn from you and the movement, what suggestions do you have for all of us now in these times as we try to go forward and build nonviolent movements to confront everything: white supremacy, racism, permanent warfare, poverty, greed, nuclear weapons, gun violence, catastrophic climate change? The list goes on and on. And especially, what would you encourage young people to do? So some general suggestions to our listeners about carrying
I think in Martin's preaching, he gave us a number of things. One, he said that black men and women in slavery had sometimes more faith than the prophets of the Bible, that Jeremiah raised questions. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? But black men and women in slavery turned Jeremiah's question mark into an exclamation point. And they sang, there is a balm in Gilead that makes the wounded whole. There's a balm in Gilead that heals the sin-sick soul. And so when I get discouraged and think my work's in vain, then I know the Holy Spirit revives my soul again, because there is a balm in Gilead that makes the wounded whole. And Martin had a poetic eloquence about his preaching that gave it additional power, because he was speaking biblically, but he was mixing it with the songs and the faith and the suffering of black people, over throughout our history. And it it took, it created a spiritual power and a spiritual awakening that that puts all of the suffering in perspective. In fact, it lifts you up above the suffering of this earth and allows you to look forward to the kingdom of God and the life to come.
So you said that in the HBO documentary King in the Wilderness, where you talked about the Poor People's Campaign in Vietnam, and then you're going to Memphis. And there you said something I never heard before, that by the time of Memphis, Martin was no longer speaking and thinking politically so much as thinking and speaking spiritually, even, as movement organizer. Is that what you were getting at?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it was always a spiritual movement.
Right.
That incidentally had political implications. For instance, I went with him when he won the Nobel Peace Prize. President Johnson was pretty low, and because he was bogged down with the war in Vietnam, and we went to see him, and our appointment was for something like 4 p.m, and we got there early, but we didn't get to see President Johnson until after 6, because the Vietnam hawks were in the Oval Office beating up on him, trying to get him to escalate. And we met with the vice president and the the attorney general in the Justice Department. And when we went over to president's office, they were coming out, but we were 2 hours late. And President Johnson was very depressed. And he didn't disagree. Everything Martin said, he said, I agree with you, Dr. King, I just don't have the power. And he must have said that 10 times, because everything Martin raised a question about, we didn't fuss at him about Vietnam. We were talking about feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, healing the sick, setting at liberty those who were oppressed. It was a poor people's campaign. Mm-hmm. And when we left there, we did everything but pray together. But when we left, I was thinking that, I was thinking that Dr. King was tired and that he needed a sabbatical. And I said, Dr. King, I said, Martin, President's right. You really need to take, this was December. I said, you really need to take, 6 months off or so. And just get this movement together in your mind. And he said, no. I said, well, what you going to do? He said, we got to get the president some power. And I said something else, and he said, no, you're wrong. We got to get the president some power.
So you went to Selma.
Everything I said, his answer was, no, we're going to get the president some power.
Wow.
See, and then Mrs. Boynton showed up, just before Christmas, mm-hmm. and invited us to come to Selma.
So we're running out of time here, Andy, but we could talk so much, and maybe we can do this again someday about then Selma and Chicago and the Poor People's Campaign and Vietnam and then Memphis. Jim Lawson and I used to talk about what Martin said in those last days in Memphis. I want to ask you, because I only learned it about 10 years ago, that Jim said Martin stood up there one night and announced his definition of hope. In Memphis, Martin says, hope is the final refusal to give up. And I think that's brilliant, original. I'm not giving up. In other words, it's such a practical definition. And I think that's very helpful today. I wonder, do you remember that? And what keeps you hopeful? And what words of encouragement do you have for folks to be hopeful, to be in it, the struggle for the long haul, and to keep following the nonviolent Jesus for life?
I'm glad you said that, because I don't remember that.
Yeah,
I remember being in the church, but I also remember that he was really sick. I mean, he had a fever, and he really didn't want to go out. And he said he would just go to the church because it was pouring down rain, and the church was packed with people, and they were standing outside in the rain to hear him. And he got carried away and gave that speech, which in many ways predicted his own death the next day.
I'm not sure that he spoke that phrase at that speech at the Mason Temple. You know, I'd been to the mountaintop, but it was in one of those speeches in that week or two, and Jim said he heard it. But what gives you hope, Andy? And how have you been able to maintain your hope all these years? And what advice do you have for me and our listeners about hope?
You know, I'm not sure. I've never thought about it, but I think that what I learned from Martin King was what he learned from his father and his grandfather and his grandmother. And it's the history of a people who, going all the way back to the book of Genesis and throughout the New Testament, are constantly reminded of visions of a way out of no way. I mean, hope when there's nothing to be hopeful about, suddenly. And he would use hymns, truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future, for behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadows, keeping watch above his own. And we have grown up. I mean, I'm 93 years old now, and I've been singing these songs since I was 3. And it's not something I have to dream up. It's something that comes up in moments of despair and moments when everybody else is giving up. You see, mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He's stamping out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed his faithful lightning from his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. You know, glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. And I mean, I don't know how many times I heard Martin say that, but there was an extra passion when he said it in Mississippi, out in front of the police station where the Cheney and Schwerner and Goodman were killed, and the police were around there still making fun of the fact that they were killed. When Ralph Abernathy prayed there, he included in his prayer, the guilty parties are right here within the sound of our voice. And somebody in the background whom I didn't know and didn't hear said, "You're damn right." But he kept on praying. And we marched away from there singing. And one of our favorite songs, "Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around." Keep on marching, keep on walking, marching up to freedom land.
Well, that's a good way to end, and we'll all keep trying to do that. I just want to thank you again for this great blessing, Reverend Andrew Young, for speaking with me today. Let me thank you, friends, for listening to the Nonviolent Jesus podcast. You can hear more podcasts and find other upcoming Zoom programs at beatitudecenter.org, and you can sign up there to receive a free newsletter about other upcoming podcasts and Zooms, and make a donation for this free work if you want. May the God of peace bless you all. Keep on following the nonviolent Jesus on the freedom road to peace. See you next time.